I never really had to think about free speech. I was just living. Until one night during a schoolhouse dialogue, another student told me she didn't feel free to speak in America. Not because it was illegal, but because saying the wrong thing as an immigrant could put her future at risk. That moment stayed with me. Because if America is built on liberty and equality for all, why does free speech feel risky for immigrants? To answer that, I had to go all the way back to the beginning, to the Declaration of Independence. Written in 1776, the Declaration of Independence is one of the most influential documents in American history. At its core, it was a breakup letter, the colonies telling Britain they were done being ruled without a voice. But it became something much bigger. It laid out a radical promise.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Those words went on to inspire movements and revolutions around the world, but from the start, it had limits. When it said all men are created equal,
it could have only meant really a very specific group of people. At the time, it would have only applied to white men who owned property.
Here's something most people don't realize. The Declaration isn't law. It doesn't create rules or penalties. Instead, it sets the ideals that the country is supposed to live up to. The founders knew that. So 11 years later, they created the Constitution to turn those ideals into a working government. To protect that new government, the Bill of Rights was added. It spelled out the rights that the government couldn't take away. And right at the top was the First Amendment.
The purpose of the First Amendment is to permit free and open discussion about the important issues of the day.
That's the ideal. But today, immigrants are often the ones living in the gap where free speech exists on paper but feels risky in real life. In immigrant communities, this fear isn't abstract. It shows up in everyday conversations and in the things people choose not to say.
The Constitution hasn't changed. The amendments haven't changed to the Constitution. That's still the law, but it's a question of how we interpret it.
The law itself is clear, but how it's applied isn't. And that uncertainty matters, because when enforcement is discretionary, the government gets room to decide how and against whom it's enforced.
Immigration law is the weak link in our constitutional system in terms of protecting people's liberties in many ways. That if the government labels you as not having the right papers, that becomes an excuse to take away fundamental rights.
And immigrants are especially vulnerable because they face a consequence that citizens don't: deportation.
You're no longer legally in the United States, and we have a right, like every country in the world has a right, to remove you from our country.
That power is real, and people know it.
They're unsettled because of that fear that they may dig into your immigration status and find a reason to get you out of the country.
That fear isn't hypothetical, it's already happened. Not all speech becomes risky. It's speech the government doesn't like. Speech that's critical, political, or seen as a threat.
When that happens to one, it deters many, many others from speaking.
That's why so many immigrants self-censor. Not because they have nothing to say, but because the risk is too high. And when immigrants go quiet, we don't just lose their voices. We lose something democracy needs.
We know that the most powerful voices on any issue are the voices of people most impacted by the policy. But if the government can shut off speech by identity, then we have a situation where people whose voices are most important can be silenced.
Immigrant speech matters, not just for immigrants, but for all of us. At first, I thought this was just an immigrant issue, that immigrants were the only ones at risk. But I learned quickly that when the government can decide whose voices matter and whose don't, then that power doesn't disappear once it's used. It changes what free speech means for everyone. Now, some might say, stay quiet, don't take the risk. But here's what that misses.
And it's a message that they want to make an example out of me, even if you are a legal resident, even if you are a citizen, actually, that we will find a way to come after you, to punish you, if you speak against what we want.
You should know if there are times when other people's rights are being taken away, because if that's happening to other people, then it certainly can happen to you as well.
250 years ago, the Declaration of Independence made a radical premise that all people are born with unalienable rights. Now, that premise hasn't settled the question of rights. Instead, it sets a moral standard that people still measure their reality against. Immigrants today live inside that standard and the gap that it creates. And that gap between what America promises and what people experience is a declaration's enduring impact in action. Because without that promise, there will be no standard to fall short of. That's why the promise matters. It gives people something to hold America accountable to.